Celtic Lighterms, Celtic Lighterms, Celtic Lighterms, Celtic Lighterms, Celtic Lighterms, Celtic.
This is it's Celtic Ligers podcast. We're joined today by Turlough Kelly. Yeah,
that's me, as far as I know.
All right. Yeah. What would you label yourself? A filmmaker?
I just do the Garth Marenghi thing.
Yeah, author, dream maker, visionary, plus actor. Turlough Kelly. Have you found? I guess that your politics and stuff like that might have, colored people's impression of you then when you're, I don't know, in this, because we were talking about how you were involved in making stuff still.
Kind of not directly, because I just think that it's so far off the radar of our media class that, to some extent they don't even see that. They see, I think they see, look, it's what happens in any capitalist society, but insofar as they see the radicalism of a proposal, they see it as whether it's something that can be commodified or not. You can put that, you can put that big shiny sticker on it saying this is a radical production. I think that's the extent of their engagement a lot of the time. Now, there are certain things that will kind of raise red flags very quickly. We did, I think there's a piece in the late lamented Rabble magazine, that the same edition actually that covered our film, but there was a gentleman who tried to make a radio drama about what happened to Rachel Peavoy in Ballymun, which is a story that really needs to be told, and I don't think has been told with any degree of accuracy. So he did it kind of, it was some kind of radio commission or competition, and they really liked the script, but when they realized what it was about and that it was a retelling of what happened to Rachel Peavoy, there was kind of, they just dropped it immediately. And
I wouldn't.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I just wouldn't be very familiar with the story. Rachel Peavoy, is there kind of?
Yeah, I kind of give you the basics of it, because I think there might be proper journalists hopefully looking into it at the moment. So it happened in the very cold summer of, I think, 2000. If you remember that, or cold winter rather, of 2010, 2011. If you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that one. Yeah, I got tonsillitis that year.
It was really harsh, kind of the harshest I've ever experienced. But so, right at the time, Dublin City Council was trying to use the kind of the terminology they use, which is a bit ominous, detenant. Some of this is kind of like 15 years into the regeneration at this point, or slightly less maybe, but they're trying to detenant Culture Road, the flats on Culture Road.
Hello, here I am, just coming in on a dodgy mic to correct Turlough per his request. It wasn't Culture Road, it was in fact Shangan, so little edit for you there.
And Rachel Peavoy was one of the last remaining tenants there, and the heating system failed in the flats basically. Now, and obviously extremely cold winter, the kind of the issue at dispute is how and why that heating system failed. And that, like, again, as I said, just people looking into that in a proper, structured, serious way, as I understand at the moment. But yeah, you can kind of draw your own conclusions about what might have happened there. And Rachel became obviously so concerned by the conditions that she and her children were living in, that she actually sent her children to live with someone else for the duration of the cold snap, because it was so cold. And then Rachel was found dead from hypothermia in her flat in January. And yeah, there was an extremely contentious inquest into the death afterwards, particularly into the initial evidence as to whether a window had been opened in the flat. This one very few cases in which the guards actually kind of broke ranks with the state, because the guards came out and after the inquest and said that they felt their evidence had been totally misrepresented, which is very, very unusual. But so there was no public inquiry held. There was a vote on this, I suppose, an indicative vote at Dublin City Council. Dublin City Councillors voted it down, including, by all accounts, some who had committed to supporting an inquiry, to the family, I mean. And as you can imagine, the family was and is just utterly, utterly devastated by both what happened, obviously, to their daughter, their sister, and to, and the fact that they didn't get any kind of due process, or in their view, any kind of truthful account of what happened. And I think that I've spoken to the family over the years, and that, like, I cannot kind of emphasize enough what an impact that had on that family. And obviously the tragic circumstances of losing a relative in under circumstances like that, but also just feeling that they were totally shut out from any kind of justice, or from any kind of accountability for what happened. It's just been devastating to them. So that story was, I understand, I think the chap's name, I don't want to get it wrong, was Alan O'Brien. I do think it's available on SoundCloud, Alan O'Brien, playwright. And it's on, you can read the story if you Google Alan O'Brien, Rachel Pivoy, the Rabble story will come up. So it was the PJ O'Connor Award for Best New Radio Drama. With his play was called Snow Falls and So Do We. So his account of what happened and how the people involved reacted when they realised what that play was about is very telling. But I haven't come up against anything that explicit, I must say, in my experience. It tends, as I said, I don't think there's even these kind of issues aren't even on the radar for a lot of people in Irish media.
No, I was thinking, even as you were saying, because it's like, I was thinking about the wasn't it last year, earlier this year, where there was talk about like a direct provision movie being made about the asylum seeker who falls in love with the guard, and there is all these things that are being made where like they're, all of these tragic things that happen in our society are kind of used as confection almost on these things. It's like they're kind of ornamental, but like you say, if you were to actually investigate and kind of make things about like who's responsible and what does this mean, and what does it say about a society that we're in where these things happen, it's like no, we want like kind of The Last Samurai, except in a direct provision center, where there's like a kind of it's like, isn't it awful? But anyway, who did this? Who knows? We'll move on. And,
That's exactly it. And it really bothers me when, like, it's kind of a difficult thing, because we do occasionally have these kind of heart-rending primetime specials or whatever on a really genuine, serious issue that the journalists involved actually do a good job of, conveying, just how bad this is, and just how deep an impact it's having on the individuals involved, and how unacceptable it is societally. But at the same time, it's kind of like they kind of make out on both ends of that. At the same time, if anything, if a political project came along, or even just a political campaign around that given issue, that threatened to change any of that in a serious way, our media would come down like a ton of bricks. So, I really do question the sincerity of people who these media outlets that, that are aware of and can convey the extent of the suffering in this society that so many different cohorts of our society are experiencing, but at the same time are totally wedded to the political dispensation that makes that happen.
I was reading an article during the week. I took a screen grab of it, and I was like, I'll give you one guess who wrote this, but it was about the what is it like? It was something to do with like the license fee or something like that. It was an RTE thing anyway. Like But oh yeah, I think, let me look this up. Anyway, it was only relevant because of just what you were saying about like this kind of two-pronged attack almost, where it's like, God, what a scoop, I got this story, and they put it out there and you tug at your heartstrings, and then at the same time, like you're saying, when it comes to these things, you just soften them, the impact, you don't you flatten them out. But where is this? Okay, hold on. I put a so there. This is from the Irish Times, and actually, I will pause it. You know, you can guess who wrote this yourself. I think you'll be able to guess it pretty handy. There has been widespread speculation that a previous proposal for a broadcasting levy applied to every household rather than only those with a television would be resurrected. However, there are fears this would arouse significant public opposition akin to the water charges experience. Who would refer to the water charges as an experience, you know? Like,
that's a bit of a bang of Leahy off it.
Oh yeah, no, I got it in one. Yeah. But it is that type of thing, like where I've seen Pat Leahy talk about like how, you know, oh, this story's got legs and we'll see how it pairs out, and the public's reaction has been thusly, and it's like, but then like he just kind of gives off this air consistently about how, like, you know, the news has no impact. We just chronicle everything that happens. There's nothing here, you know. But then, you know, he'll come out from behind the parapet for specific issues, and then say, like, you know, I don't know. It is amazing that these people kind of pretend to have so little power when they control what people are going to be talking about for the next few weeks, essentially. You know?
Well, I think to some extent they have whether they're consciously aware of this or not, that, you know, they understand that they're cogs in a wheel. You know, if it wasn't them towing this line, it would be someone else, because that's what, you know, the imperative of what the political class, you know, demands of its media. So, you know, I think they're very, like, I think they feel as though they're independent agents and they're fearless seekers for truth, and that they're not constrained in any way, but their understanding of the world and their understanding of the acceptable range of political opinion is so constricted that, yeah, they have a huge amount of freedom within that, but that, you know, in relative terms, it's going to come out the same at the other end. You know, so yeah, I do, like, the self-regard of the Irish media does nauseate me, but yeah, I try not to waste too much time thinking about it, because I think you can give them disproportionate credit and or disproportionate blame. Well, not blame, but you know, they're really, as I said, cogs in a wheel. They're like, there's one or two or more malevolent than others, but really policy is set at a much higher level, and they're just it's mouthpieces, really.
Yeah. I definitely do. It's too much of my mental energy is taken up thinking about Mark Paul. That happens a lot. Like, and sometimes I feel like I was like, I'll just see what he's been posting recently for a laugh. And I was like, why did I do this? I'm not laughing, and now I'm furious. You know, it's like, you know.
I mean, there is that niche there. I mean, there is. I think one of the kind of benefits of getting older is that you've encountered a lot of this the first time round, so it's kind of like Mark Paul can't really annoy me in any way that Kevin Myers already didn't, you know. Yeah. So it's kind of, you know, it's first as farce, second as even more farcical farce.
I was just thinking of you wearing like a Bane mask. It's like, you know, you merely adopted the bad punditry. I was born in it, molded by it, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know how to do this organically or elegantly, so my transition into this is just going to be, I guess, something that was just really on my mind was about like Merchant's Arch and Cobblestone there recently, and it wasn't because I was happy to see people out protesting, but ultimately, like, you know, it's all kind of basically the whole topic of this is just Dublin City and this kind of continuing slow decline that people are just observing and kind of don't feel like they can have any kind of sway or control over it. And all of these people who are the players and characters involved in that. So we'll obviously get to Owen Keegan later on, but ultimately, like the Merchant's Arch and Cobblestone things, it was like, you know, I visited a friend of mine in London and we were talking about Merchant's Arch, and he was like, yeah, I've seen two different people get stabbed underneath that, you know. And then there's also like with me, it was like, yeah, I've seen two people get like assaulted out underneath this thing, you know. And it's not like the protests were only for Merchant's Arch. Obviously, it was more to do with the cobblestone becoming some sort of fucking barnacle on a hotel. But like, it like I'm also not particularly like a fan of trad music. Like, it's not my bag, you know. And there's been plenty of places that have been closed down in Dublin so far as well. And I just kind of had this feeling like where it's like, we even have to mobilize a bunch of people to be like, please don't turn this archway that has some sort of character into another hotel. Like, we even have to, like, it's just so, it just make you despair. It's like, you know, it's this feeling of like two things that I don't really care about, but I feel compelled to defend because it's like, you've taken so much, don't take this as well, you know?
There is an element of that. Like, I really kind of, I try and struggle against the impulse just to sneer at stuff or just to have a contrarian take, because I think it's really annoying. But it does still, like, I am still a product of that environment, so it does still rise up in me. But yeah, I did have that vague thought when it was great to see some kind of public pushback. Just that was really encouraging, and apparently the numbers were quite good. But I did think, at the end of the day, this is kind of, or sorry, no, I didn't think this. This was an unworthy thought that I had, that I'm exercising now, which is, you know, at the end of the day, this is a preoccupation of a very particular demographic within Dublin that you know, we didn't see these numbers on the streets when people were literally just dying, and still are. And I did have that thought, you know, is this, you know, a political or class-based pushback, or is this just kind of a cultural, you know, a cultural objection to, or an aesthetic objection to the hotelification of Dublin? As I said, that's not a useful thought. It's useful to think about those tensions and who's involved and why certain people are involved and why certain people are animated by some issues. I do think it's great that people are out, and I do fully support that campaign. But I think kind of building that solidarity or that sense of collective action around housing and the character of the city, and, you know, the architectural makeup of the city are literal life and death issues, as well as being hugely important cultural issues. And I kind of do just wish that the left, such as it is, could harness that in a more could harness some kind of form of resistance in a more visible and lasting and, you know, solid way. But like, I'd be lying if I said that thought didn't occur to me about, you know, why the cobblestone and why not X or Y. But at the end of the day, it is some recognition, I suppose, that we have the city as a shared experience, and that we have some recognition of the thing that our entire society and our entire media really has been pushing against for decades, with just a sense that we have some kind of collective experience of human existence, and that means something. And, you know, that it's not just our individual consumer impulses that are real or meaningful. And so anytime people get together in recognition of that fact, I think that's positive.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I put in brackets after this, the den as well, because I think, you know, one thing that's important is that there's, like, you know, Why these things? I think it was probably because there were two events that were very close together. It's Merchant's Arch, then the Cobblestone. It's like, you know, if they had been months apart, maybe the demonstration wouldn't have been the same, you know? It would have just felt like, again, this slow chipping away. But because they were so close together, it was like, what the fuck? What's happening, you know? But I guess at the same time, then the Den... this is weeks ago now, so it just goes to show she's been burning a hole in my head to say this at all. But... people might be aware that, like, you know, Dempsey's Den, and then it was like the Den, and then it was Den TV, and it's like kind of like just the interstitial puppet sections for introducing cartoons, you know. And that's what it was. And it's like, as funny as all as they were, like, you know, they had these puppets, and then then people, I guess kids don't like puppets anymore, so they took them away. And then they, like, Zig and Zag, like, had like an animated TV series that was on CBBC, and I almost animated on it. I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, I could animate it on that. I would like to, but I ended up getting paralyzed because I felt like an imposter, like I wasn't doing them justice. This is me as like a young man, a much younger man, but like I once I saw the show, I was like, fuck it, I could have done that. But anyhow, too little, too late. And also Jan made it, so would I want to? Anyway, for some reason there was like a comic relief thing, and then they like reunited Ray Darcy and Zig and Zag and Dustin, and it was so popular that they're like, why don't we make like a TV show out of this, that it goes on Sunday nights, and it's kind of all family viewing, and it's like kind of modeled off of the Den, obviously. And then I was kind of cynical of this. I really didn't like that. Like, I was like, can we just have like new things? You know what I mean? Do I have to have the puppet show from when I was a kid back, you know, on Sunday nights? And but then the people that they had on were actually pretty decent. Like, they had CMAT, and I think they had the Mary Wallopers, and like the musical acts were pretty good. I don't know who they had on as guests, but those two stood out to me. And you know, you got like fairly bare bones set, so it couldn't have cost that much to make. It didn't feel like it would anyway. But yeah, they just cancelled it. But then immediately there was like a bit of a backlash on Twitter, and people were tweeting it out, and they made up this petition to get it back. And I kind of was like, I might actually like sign this petition, not because I believe in it, but because I actually think that maybe RT are the one people, you know, one body that could be pressured into actually doing something. Like, it might actually come back because I signed this petition, you know. Like, and but it was also this feeling of despair because, like I said, it's the puppet show from when I was a kid, and that's the TV you get to watch now as an adult. But then on top of that, the writers for it, and as good and all as they are, it's like been consistently involved in writing. You know, the guys who do Zig and Zag are like a writing pair who have written, like, they wrote that show Fantasy Ireland, which was like an animated show. They had like Podge and Rog, which came back for a brief spell. They write like tons of children's shows, and I don't know if like there's as much adult comedy, but then because it's all ages, I suppose I can make this case. But ultimately it was like, you know, everybody was like, let's fight for the underdog show. Let's get like the Den back on. And it kind of felt, I just wanted to draw that parallel between the things that were being protested as well, because they were all so close together.
Do you remember a few years ago when Whisper bars came back? They'd been discontinued, and there was this kind of early online, early kind of social media led campaign to bring back the Whisper bar. I was talking to someone who worked for a PR firm a few years ago, who said that was they had done that on behalf of Cadbury. Basically, it was astroturfed. Okay. There was no genuine campaign at all. It was, they just wanted to relaunch the Whisper bar, and that's where that came from.
Well, yeah, maybe I stand corrected there. You know, it's this completely organic push for people to try and get the Den
like
back on
color
TV,
revolution,
you know?
for the Den. No, it was. Yeah, I did grow up watching the Den, and it is kind of. It's in some ways it's a reflection of how atrophied the kind of imagination of our culture has become, that these things are still around. But at the same time, It's also just reflective of how much a society has changed beyond recognition since the 80s and 90s. Because like something like the Den, which is like a common cultural experience for 1 million, 2 million people in this country, would probably have been instantly familiar with it. And I remember buying bootleg Zig and Zag products on Moore Street like 30 years ago. That just couldn't exist anymore. We don't really live in that society where things are that get that chance to really embed themselves in the national consciousness in the same way. So I think in some ways it's a nostalgia for that as much as it is for. I mean, they were through the eyes of an 8, 9, 10-year-old. They were a superior form of entertainment. But I think what people are missing really is obviously their youth to some extent, but just a cultural touchstone that they shared with everyone else. The Den, Italia 90, that kind of stuff. I don't think it can exist anymore.
Do you think there's a way that it could exist again if certain things were different, like that people, or is it just become, I wasn't on Twitter for ages, and then when you go on Twitter, like it's become a little insufferable now, but like they're like, because I've been on it so long, but there was like Irish Twitter, and there was kind of like a common language and people talking about like cultural touch points, even if it was like, I suppose, yeah, now that you mention it, they were very old. It was like the fucking, what's his name? Colomini and the t-shirt. Yeah. And, things like that, and spice bags. I mean, spice bags are pretty recent, but still it's not the same significance as like, say, Italia 90 or the Den even. Although normal people, that was
but exactly that's normal people. And I think was it Tiger King was the other one. The only reason Normal People is obviously a much superior production to Tiger King, but I think the only reason that they got such traction is that it was at the start of the lockdown when they had literally a captive audience, and that I think is the only way you can recover that extent of common experience. Like there is a way to revive it, but I don't think through this society. I think it's on the far end of a pretty significant change in how we relate to one another and the means of production, put it that way.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Owen Keegan, because this is also one that's and then it'll lead nicely into I don't know, Dublin City Council or whatever. It's very hot in this room. I have absolutely no idea why, but I'm like sweating, and so if I sound delirious, that's why.
It's 18, 19 degrees out.
That's disgusting. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. No, I was just thinking about data centers and getting depressed with this whole thing about like 20 degrees in towards the end of October. It's like, can we avoid this any longer? I guess we can, because power outages yesterday in Dublin, and but anyway, so if people might be Owen Keegan, can you tell me I didn't even say the name of the documentary that you made. You made the fourth act, which was about Ballymun and this kind of regeneration project that kind of failed to regenerate, basically. It did kind of, it failed on the community's terms for sure, but I'm not sure it failed on the council or the state's terms. But so would you want to talk about Keegan, or will I just describe the film? Or well, I just want it to be like the role that Keegan plays. Like we've mentioned Owen Keegan before because of some of the stupid stuff that he said, obviously. And I think the last time we mentioned him is when he was contemplating, basically trying to do Kickstarter for the fucking the whitewater rafting thing. Like he was looking at like, could we crowdfund for this? And it's like, could you just give up, man, please? And now like we're in a year where we're talking about like, can the country's energy infrastructure survive the winter? And it's like, the idea of a whitewater rafting thing now, if you brought that up, would be completely farcical, Well,
this is from my, I don't know huge, because I try and I try and avoid the abyss staring back, so I don't look into these things as much as I probably should. But Keegan's background, we understand, is that he is that most accursed of professions, an economist by training. Although I think he might be a civil engineer as well. But he was CEO of Drumlera Rathdown. Pretty sure he was, yeah. County council, and then he copped a similar gig with DCC, and yeah, I think he's kind of made a name for himself, both by being the figurehead of kind of the really destructive processes that DCC have unleashed in this city, but also kind of owning that and making himself a bit of a bogeyman, and making kind of outrageous and combative statements, which I sometimes think he might have overplayed his hand there a bit, in the sense that I think you'll buy that from like Michael O'Leary, because that's part of his brand. Our media will and media and the state can and will assimilate and encourage that. But I think probably what they want from the likes of Keegan is to be this kind of bloodless, amoral figure who is just a sheer technocrat, that will absolutely not give 1 inch to democratic influence of any kind, but will smother it with bureaucracy and procedure, rather than coming out and saying some of the things he does. So I do wonder if he might come a cropper at some stage.
Yeah, I guess like the two roles as well, and you mentioned it with like I guess I was struck there when you said the CEO of like a certain area of Dublin, because it's not a word that like you would associate with like local governance, I guess. Yeah. And then the Dublin executive, people have been pointing out, there's a city executive or whatever, like the role that he currently holds now, like again, is not like democratically elected, and it seems to be accountable to very few people. Yeah. If anybody.
Oh no, it's like Dublin is not in any meaningful sense a democracy. It's just not, and I think there is an opening there. If we can generate enough force on the left to do something about it, where you can talk about what a municipal socialist form of government might look like, because it's so much like Irish people in general have a really bad case of kind of civics class brain, where they think that we live in an exemplary democratic society, and maybe the people in charge are the wrong people, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the structures of our society. Very hard for anyone to make that case about Dublin, even just on a democratic basis, because it is not a democracy. That between the kind of restrictions or strictures that have been placed on local government, and just the sheer, the structure of how decision making is done in the city, which has, bypasses any even very compromised electoral process. I think there is really an opening there for people to get together and ask, what would a democratic Dublin and also a socialist Dublin, which is at this point a prerequisite, look like, and how would it do things differently, and to kind of generate a bit of momentum behind that concept that people should have more of a say, at the very least, in how their city is run, than a tiny elite sliver of developers for whom all policy is currently made.
Yeah, and it's like you were saying, like it is kind of Owen Keegan's role to be like that bloodless technocrat, and maybe he can say these provocative things that draw attention every now and again, but I guess like with what he's done recently, which is this letter that people might be familiar with, where Rory Power, president of the UCD Students' Union, was basically sending him a letter to kind of what is it? I'm just going to read the bits here. Well, ultimately, what you're saying is that he's drawn too much attention to himself, but the longer that he continues to do so might be to the benefit of pointing out the structural inadequacies of the current Dublin Council. You'd hope, You'd
hope, but like there is, as I said, like a huge current in politics over the last few years has been the status quo kind of ostentatiously saying to people, no, you do not get a say. And if you try to enforce any kind of democratic control of these processes, we will fucking crush you. And I think like in that sense, that kind of approach would make sense. But I don't necessarily know that that's what he's doing, and I don't know that that's really what the state or our ruling class wants from him. So I think there is that kind of very conspicuous impunity is a big part of how DCC do things and how the Irish state do things. But I do wonder if he's kind of teetering on the edge of thinking he's Michael O'Leary.
Yeah, because one of them was like, so I'm just going to read from the middle of the thing, but he as in Rory Power sent him this letter bringing up certain objections, and he's responding to it. And people have paid a lot of attention to the last paragraph, which we'll definitely read. But in the middle, there's some bits as well where he says, for example, at no stage did I state that the granting of permission in respect of, what was it, PBSA? Was that the one?
I think so.
I'm going to edit around all of my mumbling. The purpose-built student accommodation. So, drawing attention, I shouldn't have made this so small. Yeah, basically, there's this, despite the fact that we've been building student accommodation pretty consistently for the past 4 or 5 years, there now seems to be a lack of student accommodation because of change of use, and people are kind of pointing this out, like how, like even then, like I don't think most students could afford to live in the student accommodation that was being built or provided, but it is noticeable now that at a moment where you could be lowering the rents, that they're like, oh, no, we'll just change it to be an apart hotel or an Airbnb or something like that. And the council is just letting them. And so this is what Rory Power was pointing out to him. And he said, for example, in response, Keegan says, at no stage did I state that the granting of permission in respect of these particular applications was justified by the lack of formal objections. I simply noted that no objections slash observations were received in relation to one particular application, and no appeal was submitted. So it was just one of those things. I didn't say it. I just heavily implied it, and obviously, and it's just this kind of lack of respect in the thing with this letter that's being sent, and he caps it off with the paragraph. Finally, if you genuinely believe that excess profits are being made in a PBSA market, I am surprised the Students' Union has not entered the market itself and provided lower cost student accommodation for its members. So like in isolation, people are saying, can you believe he actually said this? And, maybe it goes to show that a lot of people actually were like, believe that he was probably being serious about it. Like, and he's probably... But ultimately, it was like that thing you're talking about, the Michael O'Leary kind of jab. Like, I'm just doing a bit of a zinger at the end here to kind of show how little I respect you. But ultimately, he just doesn't have the swagger to pull it off. So it comes off as like tone deaf, obviously, but to some people, it could have even been considered as a legitimate proposal.
Well, I mean, I think the interesting thing there is that he's kind of, as often said about figures like this, he's only saying what other people are thinking. The other people in this case being
absolutely
our ruling class, the executive of Dublin City Council, senior civil servants, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil functionaries, some other parties as well, which is that the only valid route to any kind of change is via the market. So, literally, if you cannot achieve the outcome that you want through the market, in this case by setting yourself up as a property developer, then you have no right to complain about it. And that's literally that is literally Dublin City Council policy across every aspect of its vision for the city. It's that, like they did this thing in Ballymun, the Ballymun shopping centre, which was kind of the centre point of the town for a long time. They kind of, again, de-tenanted it over the course of a very long time and left it empty, like deliberately left it empty in the hope that it would be bought for apartments basically, with maybe some retail added on. And I think it was a Dublin Inquirer asked the city council for, this was a huge thing in Ballymun that there was no, this, 20, 30,000 people there, or there used to be. Jesus, it's gone down a hell of a lot since the regeneration. I think the population is well under 20,000 now. But that there was no place to buy kind of basic things like clothing in town. And Dublin Inquirer asked the city council about, what it was kind of doing to provide these kinds of services or opportunities for people, and their response was, if a shopping centre is viable in Ballymun, then presumably one will be proposed. So in other words, if basically you get what you deserve within the market, is the message to communities. If you don't have certain services, if you don't have certain amenities, that's on you for failing to provide the right kind of environment to operators in the market, which is the only valid form of development that DCC will countenance. Like, these people are ideological fanatics. Like, they really are. To a greater extent, I think, than most people realize. Like, to some extent, obviously they don't do anything about it, and all their policies functionally lead in the same direction. But even Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael have to nod towards, oh no, this is non-ideological. This is about what will deliver housing, or this is about what will deliver development. It's not. We don't care who does it. We don't care if the state does it. We don't care if private operators do it. That's not how DCC thinks. DCC is like a full-on libertarian enterprise. It genuinely is, and it sees any departure from that as not just unrealistic but pathological. Genuinely, it sees that as they cannot
harmful,
harmful, and accept with sneering and contempt. They cannot process the idea that anyone would have a vision for society, or a vision for the city, or a vision for development within the city, which did not ultimately rest on, or entirely rest on, the market. That's the way they think, and that's why it's kind of beyond salvation as an entity. I think whatever, there's no such thing as a better DCC, or even electing a council that didn't see things that way would be irrelevant, because it'd simply be overruled. So it is the only thing that's going to generate any kind of change in Dublin, is, I think, a mass campaign for a differently structured city that begins with effectively abolishing DCC as it exists. Well,
no, it's like, not to jump ahead too much, because I'm kind of just like, this is kind of the podcast. It's all over the place, and we're weaving it in and out, because I did the film that you made, like the fourth act, and also there was an article that you wrote, and I'm not sure when, but there was a line in it, which you kind of referenced there, which is the Vradker's, as in the people of Ballymun had been judged by the market and felt wanting, and the market had found them wanting. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it is that thing where it's like, well, of course you'd get the riches if you deserve them, but clearly you don't, because obviously they didn't, decide to drop them upon you, but also that kind of turning all of these things into, the fourth act was the first time that I heard the name Dublin City Corporation, and I had no idea it was called the corporation. And much like the kind of term CEO and Dublin executive, it kind of feeds into this language of
it was the corporation until it became Dublin City Council. But exactly. I would say that goes so far back that means corporation in kind of the medieval sense, which literally, right. So it kind of predates the idea of a commercial corporation, but it was.
But it's the same attitude though that kind of permeates the whole thing, where it's like another example that came to mind was when in South William Street, when there was people drinking and the guards were battering them, that they kind of said there was some like small business owners around the area who were saying that that there was just loitering going on, you know, and that they weren't even buying anything. They weren't even paying. And it was just reminded me of, I'm sorry to going all over the place again, the heat, the delirious heat. But I don't know if you know watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but the Ferengi are kind of basically like kind of capitalist thing. But there's one time where he visits his home world and he has to pay to wait in the waiting room to see somebody, you know. There's just this idea of just like, that's, you know, you have to have your tokens to even take part in society. Even if you're not doing anything, even if you're just standing on a street, you should be paying there to be there on this street, regardless of whether maybe you're paying already out of taxes or whatever, you know. It's like there's always money that's supposed to be being generated and being made, and if it's not doing that, then yeah, it's almost like you're saying, offensive. We have to reject it at all costs, you know.
Oh yeah, like they're very clear really about that your right to, you know, physically exist in the city is dependent upon your ability to pay to do so. And, you know, it's that every interaction in the city should be either a transaction or should feed into a transaction. So exactly. Like the only argument they'll countenance for public space of any kind at all is that, you know, it's a place you go on your way to or from shopping, basically, or, you know, or buying something, or that attracts you in to buy something, because they do have this strange, there is this kind of weird perverted utopianism about how not just Dublin City Council, but a lot of similar bodies across the world see the ideal city, which is it is almost like that selection process of who is and isn't eligible to occupy space even within the city takes place before you ever get there. So kind of once you're there, there is a certain level of services or non-commercial things that they'll countenance, but it's only for, you know, people who have proved themselves worthy of accessing them through either, you know, a nominal charge that filters out the riffraff, hence the idea of, you know, paid public toilets, or are you know, the ideal is that you get it to the point where no one except those who are, you know, worthy would even bother coming into the city in the first place. So once you've established that threshold, you can kind of turn it into this kind of giant playpen, where you do have, say, the white water rafting, or you know, kind of, it's almost like their vision for the city ultimately, once they've done this kind of hard work of kind of primitive municipal accumulation, if you want to call it that, and once they've filtered out everyone who has no financial stake or entitlement in being there, that then, you know, Facebook and Google and that, those kind of working environments just filter out beyond the walls of those buildings and just take over the entire city. So there is a certain amount of like, it does just become a space for play and spending, basically. But that, you know, the only people who, just for those who are capable of affording it, and tourists, basically. Yeah, so that's where we're going. It's a really lobotomized view of civic life, but the trend towards it is inevitable unless something big changes.
There was another thing then where Varadkar appeared on Pat Kenny, and it was kind of, they were both saying, what do you think of Owen Keegan's letter? And he had this kind of like, sure, I thought it was a Waterford Whispers when I saw it, you know? Mm-hmm. Which also reminds me of like the whole kind of, you know, when I was a kid, they'd be like, you know, are you watching the Pokemon, are you? Do you know, like when you hear like a Waterford Whispers, I thought it was a Waterford Whispers. But either way,
whichever 100k advisor came up with that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Got a bonus, I'm sure. Yeah.
But like this thing where they're just kind of laughing it off and kind of being like, I mean, I wouldn't have said he's a great guy, he's doing a good job, but, you know, I guess, and just he kind of let his hair down in this letter, and sure, that's that, and, you know, oh well, I don't think anything just happened to him. But I was like, that last line could have been delivered by Radker to Paul Murphy so very easily. Do you know what I mean? If like, well, if you think that it's such a lucrative business, why aren't you getting involved in the, you know, making the private sector, you know, getting, you know, anyway. It's just this thing where like they're allowed to pretend that Owen Keegan isn't them as well, you know, and flatten it out so much that it's like a Waterford whisper.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, even if and I haven't kind of followed it for a while, so I don't want to be mean about Waterford Whispers, because it could be putting out some very cutting stuff for all I know. But the thing is, like you can really engage with this stuff to the extent that you want. So again, they might just see it as something that's vaguely like to Varadkar. It's just, and his advisors, it's not, you know, they would never really have an analysis of any particular joke or anything. It's just, oh, that's something that's vaguely adversarial, and that fits into that satire box. And as we said earlier, it kind of fulfills that function that makes it look like you're living in a healthy society that
where people are held to
defends
account,
freedom of speech. So I don't know, but
anyway, so to finish off with Owen Keegan, he did respond and kind of did the usual kind of Fine Gael type apology, which is like half-hearted, and then also has a little sentiment at the end, which is like innocuous to most, but looks fairly, you know, like he's also being sarcastic and having a go at the same time. I just wanted to read out that last paragraph where he says, on a positive note, this episode has highlighted the ongoing crisis in student accommodation in Dublin, which needs to be addressed. And it was just this feeling of like, I don't know, it was so loaded to me. I just had this feeling of like the thing that we've been talking about for the past 2 months. You know, he really put it into the spotlight by being so glib and unsympathetic to the, you know, president of the UCD union. Anyway, it's just a nice little cap to it, but I think that they're still trying to, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say on that, actually, this is kind of the second time he's crossed the line sufficiently in words rather than deeds, because he's done it lots of times in deeds, that he's had to kind of half-heartedly walk it back. I mean, I think the first time is when he said that Dublin's homeless crisis was partly due to the homeless services being too good and attracting too many people, which again is kind of the market logic of how these people think. That, you know, if a service is sufficiently attractive, then people are going to want to access it. And it's kind of like, in a rational city, obviously he would have been gone the day he said that. Because, you know, you can't leave someone who thinks like that even in charge of a city with such a rampant homelessness crisis. But the Shinners bailed on as I recall, on the confidence motion, which didn't have force, but at the very least would have been indicative to people that this was unacceptable. So I don't know if there's the appetite to take him on. It was the head of the, I think I have it here somewhere, there was kind of similarly honking comments made by the head of the the Dublin Region Homeless Executive, who was Eileen Gleeson at the time. This is going back about 2017, 2018, when she said that people become homeless because of years of bad behaviour, and it's behaviour that's not the behaviour of you and me, which is really how these people think. And she was kind of did get some kickback for that, but that's how you have to, once you do have this sense hegemonically, which is a good thing in society, that people should be treated equally, that becomes, you know, and people shouldn't be subjected to prejudice on the basis of who they are or where they come from or anything. That doesn't necessarily take away the imperatives behind inequality. So you have to find another way to justify it. And the way you do that is by saying effectively that, as we said, that these people have been given the same opportunities as everyone else within the market, and they have no one else to blame really if they don't come up to the mark, and you know, making them seem like it's kind of almost routine now that when people just die on the streets, it disappears from the news cycle within a day, if at best. And it's probably going back almost 10 years now. But the first kind of really high profile incident was, I think, a chap called Jonathan Corrie, who died during a harsh winter near the Dáil.
Yeah, I remember.
And the media spent the next 2 or 3 weeks with briefings from, I'm sure you can guess where, exposing his background and his, the fact that homelessness was a choice in his case. And it did strike me as the only way to get our media just to seriously examine your background and look at your, look at the kind of what they saw in that instance as privilege that you might have come from, is to literally die on the streets, because they won't do it if to explain someone's ascent in society like that is absolutely verboten. It's exactly. Oh no, that's off the table. That's below the belt. You can't talk about someone's background when it comes to explaining where their private schooling and or their parents' wealth. That's really low class to talk about that. But if you die on the street and that reflects badly on our government or on the city authorities, then you're fair game. No, it's really disgusting. Sorry, I might just my laptop's dying. I might just plug it in here.
No worries.
I might open the window and I might make a cup of tea as well, because it's
sure.
As I said,
There's all the stuff has been pretty consistent and about the same thing in Dublin Council and stuff. And I just wanted to talk a bit more about your film, though, even though it's it was 2016 now, was it? Or is that
2017? It actually went out. I think. Yeah.
But yeah, I really loved it. I thought it was great. There was just the one in particular I was reminded of where wasn't it like where somebody paid to. They would want part of like a project where you pay to plant a tree or something. And this, I can't remember who it was, but it's kind of seemed relevant to what we were talking about thus far. Probably should explain a bit more. I think I mentioned already, but it was about Ballymun and this project of regeneration, which, depending on your perspective, failed or didn't fail, but within it, they had this character who was this guy again? I can't remember his title, essentially.
The guy's name is a German artist called, who lives in Kerry, I think, called Jochen Gertz. And to some extent, like, I almost wouldn't pin this on him necessarily, because he was kind of picking up the mood music from the very perceptively, I must say. If he'd meant this as a provocation, it would have been a very worthwhile piece of work, but I don't think he did. So basically, this was there was a huge artistic component to the regeneration, and because there was so much money involved, the Percent for Art scheme, which funds art projects that go along with major building projects, that fund was huge in this case, because there was getting on for 2 billion quid spent on the regeneration. So one of the flagship programs was one called A Map to Care. So he had, and again, he would have, he's not someone who would have been familiar with Ballymun to begin with, but he would have picked this up from the discussions he had with Ballymun Regeneration Limited and Dublin Corporation, later Dublin City Council. The point of that project was, as he said, to give people a stake in their community by making them pay for something, namely a tree with a dedication within the community. And his words, if you watch the film, I'm not putting words in his mouth, these are his literal words, was where if you care, you pay.
Yeah.
And obviously that completely disregarded the huge amount of work that people had done to keeping this community afloat over the past, in the face of mass negligence and frankly hostility over the past number of decades, and had done out of a sense of obligation to one another, out of a sense of community and collective spirit. There were so many voluntary organisations in Ballymun and obviously there's a big turnover of them over the years, but they were always there, and they were always, for the most part, just on a voluntary basis by people who had a sense of connection and obligation to one another. And to say that none of that counted for anything, because you're only the only way you can really take a stake in society or in a community is by actually paying as an individual consumer. Making that transaction is what gives you a stake in society. I think in some ways I was really fucking outraged by that whole project, but in another way it does what art's supposed to do, in that it does absolutely exemplify and really just pare back the underpinning logic that lies beneath our Irish society, Ballymon regeneration in particular, but society in general, and capitalist society more broadly, which is that the only valid motivation you can have is as an individual consumer, and that it's that which gives you a right to exist and be heard. So yeah, it's really dark shit, but yeah, I think it functions well within the film, of kind of because it is hard to talk about ideological motivations that for the most part are quite well obfuscated, but that just lays them completely bare, I think.
Yeah. What led you to kind of make the film in the first place? And I'm going to ask very generic questions, but yeah.
Yeah, no, well, I guess it kind of came about originally. I'd been doing a bit of stuff with Dublin Community Television around 2010, 2011. We attempted a satire show called Dole TV, which was kind of a product of various different people finding their feet in attempting to tell these stories. And to be honest, a lot of us did a lot of, none of us had any experience in television, so obviously it was very uneven. But through that, I got to kind of circuitously got introduced to a chap who worked at I should say I'm from Ballymon actually, so obviously I'd lived there all my life up to that point. So I was kind of familiar obviously with the community's issues, and I'd lived through the regeneration, and our flat was being demolished at that time. Obviously not with us in it. We've moved out beforehand. It had been, because I'd moved out of that flat about 2001, 2002, and it was demolished then about 2010. So it was kind of looking at it detenanted every time I went past was a strange experience. But yeah, sorry, can you cut all that? That's irrelevant. But I went to I was introduced to a chap called Andrew Keogh, who used to work with a kind of film experimental comedy collective in Dublin around the turn of the millennium, and he was working as a youth worker in what we used to call the White Elephant when we were growing up. It was the Reco, Recreation Centre in Ballymon. And yeah, someone introduced me to him, said, this fellow kind of talks about all the same mad shit that you're interested in. And he had some kind of inkling that he might be able to gain access to Plunkett Tower, which was the last tower standing at the time, for a film project. And we kicked that idea around. We started out talking about a drama project, actually, and then gradually realized that you couldn't really tell the story elliptically, but that also there was this huge treasure trove of archive that a community organization, Ballymon Communications, had built up since the early 80s, mid 70s. And so all this stuff was documented. Even though this was a community without a voice on the national level, this had all been documented by the community itself. And so we realized the raw material to make the film was there. We took it to the film board, and I think we got lucky in terms of who we spoke to, and the fact that the people we spoke to had some prior understanding of the situation in Ballymon. Wasn't a massive commitment financially, and they took a punt on it, and the stage was set for 3 or 4 years of pulling fucking teeth, which was what the process of making the film was like. But we knew that before we went into it.
So, not pleasant making it anyway. And I suppose by the end, yeah,
it was like there was a lot of resistance, but also it's just one of the things we did was, with the help of Pat McGrath, who's an actor and a All Ireland model making champion, we built a scale model of Ballymun in the old Tesco, which was a ridiculous undertaking, particularly for Pat. The amount of work he put into that, it was like 1/13 scale of the biggest housing estate in Ireland, which was enormous. Obviously, I filmed the whole thing, but there was a lot of kind of, look, it's just the nature of documentary filmmaking. It's never that pleasant. But yeah, it was kind of, for me, just, I guess I'd kind of repressed a lot of the feelings that the regeneration had stirred up, and then to have to confront them really directly was quite shocking. It's not a period I look back on particularly fondly, but I think we got something of some value at the other end anyway.
I'd agree. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
What was your thought process at the end then, in conclusion, like, you know, what you expected and what ended up happening? Like, obviously you're talking about those feelings being brought up, but like, I guess, where are you sitting with what happened and the outcome therein now?
I guess, like, the reason we called it the fourth act was really, it was two things. It was, one, there was this kind of really cut and dried 3-act narrative of what had happened at Ballymun that no one questioned. And we wanted to kind of say, well, that's not the whole story. There's, you know, Ballymun, the story of Ballymun didn't end the day they signed off on the regeneration. There was this whole other element to it. But also we were hoping that the fourth act might be, or certainly I might be how people responded to the film and how people used what was in the film to maybe turn things around in Ballymun. But I think I just underestimated the amount of trauma and the sense of defeat. Like when you rub up against a machine like that has unlimited funds, that has such ideological message discipline that it can tell you to your face that your experiences didn't happen. And it can tell you that over and over again over the course of 20 years, to the extent that you begin to believe it yourself. I think the community just lost the capacity hasn't regained the capacity to fight back or to assert itself. And really the legs were cut from under it very deliberately. That network of community organizations was totally, was just wiped from the landscape. And, you know, I would say, if there is a message from the film that anyone can use, it's that, you know, in other communities around the country, is that you need to retain the ability to represent and defend yourself as a community. You need to retain your organizations. You cannot, no matter how much money and PR they throw at it, you cannot let yourself believe that these people are your friends, or that these people have the same vision of a community or a good society that you do, because they just don't. They don't value the same things you value. They are actively hostile to what you see as, you know, the benefits of belonging to a community. They see that as backward. They don't want you to have relationships that go beyond the transactional and the market-based. They will try to undermine and destroy those relationships and those bonds as far as they can. They don't want the same things for your community as you do, and you need to retain your independence from them, and you need to retain whatever capacity you can to continue to defend your community and to advocate for your community and to represent your community, if you still have it, if you're lucky enough to still have it, which some of the communities being targeted still do to some extent. You need to hold on to that, and you need to hold yourself apart from the people who come in the garb of your friends, but very much aren't.
Yeah. So that kind of could be said for most of the country at this stage, you know,
Absolutely,
like with the direct foreign investment and all the, you know, companies that we need to keep here for a variety of reasons, and all the stuff that, you know, like you said it better than I did. I could, so I'm just going to chop out my little bit there because it's a good little place to end it. But I was just reminded of one of Pascal Donoghue's advisors who was saying, like, isn't co-living just another word for like community and diversity? Do you know, like it was meant to be like this idea of like, you know, like that they've kind of taken, and you can look at the Housing for All plan as an example of just taking that language and that idea and just kind of saying, that's what we're giving you, community, you know, diversity. You'll have all this stuff because of all these things that are coming in. But yeah, like you say, you just kind of have to, you know it when you see it and when you feel it, and then you kind of just have to hold on to that and hopefully and not be convinced by these other people that like what the alternative that they're proposing is the same thing when it's actively seeking to undermine that. The
last thing I'd say really is I do like there is this whole, like, you know, these processes, and they did it in Ballymun, they do it in other communities, is they will pretend to value your experiences and your past. And there is a lot of kind of, I think nostalgia isn't really a threat to them, because nostalgia is, you know, draws a line under the past, and you know, it can be assimilated into the process. And, you know, you saw a certain amount of that around the Docklands, I think, as well. But yeah, I've always thought like I think there's just kind of a danger with Ken Loachian type stuff as well, that you get lulled into thinking that, like I've always thought, and I think it's not really arguable, that the point of socialism is to abolish the working class. It's not to, it's to abolish that class relation. It's not to necessarily, you know, uphold it as the, you know, the exemplary form of life. Although, you know, there's lots of things that are exemplary within working class life, and certainly to a greater extent than the vision our ruling class has. But I think don't fall into that trap would be what I'd say to I'd say keep looking. Yeah, keep your eyes on the prize. You can have this kind of Joe Duffyization of your past, which is about, you know, the Dublin in the rare old times, but not really. But again, drawing a line under it as well, that was an appropriate form of society for that period. But now we're all so much more sophisticated. We can relate to one another in the market, which is we can stand on our own 2 feet in the market. I think that's always be aware of that undercurrent, that, you know, they want you to hold on to the things from your past that are not a threat to them. They don't want you to hold on to the solidarity and to the concrete bonds and to the capacity for action that you had. There was a huge amount of this around the lockout, where the lockout just turned into the commemoration of the lockout turned into just this pageant of people in like 1913 era clothing and flat caps and stuff. And, you know, they tried to distance it in time as a way of distancing the class relations, which haven't changed all that much, as something that, you know, was a live political concern. I would say that's the big danger. Nostalgia can be a real a temptation, obviously, but I would say try and hold on to, you know, the underlying bonds that made that meaningful for your community, as opposed to just the trappings of it. It's kind of the last thing I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, yeah. No, that's great. What do you think of the budget? Pretty bad, huh?
I will say my contrarian take on this is when I see the left parties doing budget submissions, they call it a submission for a reason. It's because you're buying into their logic of, I think if you're going to do that, and I do see the appeal of it, obviously, but you also have to kind of foreground for people that, look, this is how, whatever within our current constraints, within, you know, as a as a left government, this is what we could potentially do with the wealth we have. But you also have to, I think, be very realistic and say to people, this is why we would not be allowed to do. This is why we would be prevented from doing any of this. It's not about whether it's feasible within the budgets or anything like that. It's because politically, they would stop us long before we got to do any of this. That's the society you live in. That's what you need to think about, is how you circumvent the power that our ruling class has, that to some extent our media has, to stop us from implementing any of these nice and realistic and costed things, because that's not really the issue. The issue isn't, a technical or technocratic one. It's a question of political power, and that's all it's ever going to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a take on that then, yeah. 'Cause I don't have like, I don't know, the budget is just something that happens every year for me, and then I've never really understood it or followed it, and the good bits I don't trust will happen, and then the bad bits, it's like, well, they'll happen, but I have very little say over whether they happen or not. So sometimes it feels like I don't feel very invested in it whenever it happens. So whenever the thing goes out online, there's a lot of discussion which kind of goes over my head, but then anytime I even engage slightly, I get annoyed by it because of how little I feel like I know about all that stuff. But so that's why I didn't feel like it was worth making a podcast about it, because I just be like, well, that sucks, doesn't it? Oh, well,
Yeah. To some extent, the noise and the confusion is the point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to promote, actually? Where can people see the fourth act if they want to see it?
People can see the fourth act on Vimeo. So if you just Google Vimeo, the fourth act.
Sure, I'll put it in the link underneath. Yeah. I'll put it in the description underneath. Yeah.
And what else do I do? I also do a fairly idiosyncratic podcast on Irish football, and in a historical and social sense. That I figured out why it doesn't have a bigger listenership. It's because my 2 podcasts a year strategy has failed.
Yeah.
It's not a great audience retention strategy. But yeah, if you want to listen to that, it's called Irish Football Chronicles, and that's about it. I started one on kind of old or not so old Irish ghost stories as well. That's called By Lamplight or Moonlight, which is just one of those things I like. Yeah, it's just all
right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
You too, Matt.
All right, that's the episode. Patreon.com/Celtic Ligers for more bonus content. And if you want to support the show, what do you get for your money? Well, €2 gets you a thank you. It gets you access to cut for time content, which is, stuff that wasn't entirely relevant to the episode that I put up, if there is stuff that's there. €5 gets you both of those things, but also access to the back catalogue of episodes. We record bonus episodes, but we're taking a break from it for the time being because I got a lot going on. Sorry about that. Some of the bonus episodes include our review of the Charlie Haughey biopic, V for Vendetta movie, the Brexit movie. There's a lot more timeless stuff, but also the news and jibes that you've come to know and love. What do you get for €11? If you're goddamn committed enough, you get all of that, and you get a political cartoon featuring yourself drawn by me. So I got to get my pencils out this month because we got a new €11 member, which thank you very much for that. And now we thank our patrons. Sean Tag, Zainab Laffy, Ben, Sean Donnelly, Kevin Larney, Mickey Finn, Benson, Francis Breen, Simon Akers, Mark Stokes, Mark Maloney, Blahin de Burka, Alan Carroll, Stephen Bradley, Richard Zimmerman, Bridget Purcell, Emily Dulong didn't start the fire, the burning since the world's been turning. Joe Joyce started the fire. He didn't start it, actually I was mistaken. Milky Fox, Kyle O'Neill, Conor Barry, Claire O'Neill, Ronan Kerry.